Well, welcome to Meet the Candidate. And for this session, my guest is Tim Hattenburg, who is running for Spokane Valley City Council, position 6. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you.
I try and follow the same format with everybody, and it starts off with just where were you born and raised?
Well, I was actually born in North Spokane, and at the age of 6, we moved to the Spokane Valley. So I've lived in the Spokane Valley since 1959. Went to school there, started first grade there in public schools, went all the way through and graduated from Central Valley High School in 1971. I started working the fields in the valley when I was 12.
When there were still fields in the valley.
We have strawberry fields, raspberries, cherries, apples. So I have 7 siblings, so we learned hard work ethic was good for you when we found that out, and we're expected to do so. So that's a great background we had. And a lot of friends and neighbors, the same thing. There's no way you could go without getting a job in the summertime if you were looking for one. So we had a lot of friends that went through that, and I went to Washington State University after I graduated in Central Valley and received my degree in education, and was fortunate to come back to the Valley and teach for the Central Valley School District until I retired.
Oh, what were your subjects?
U.S. history and world geography primarily. So I really enjoyed that. And then Washington history also.
Yeah.
And I was able to sneak in a section of home ec, and that's another story. But so,
I don't know. It sounds like an interesting story.
Well, I love to cook, and we'd have potlucks on once a month on payday, and the teaching staff, especially some of the women, would tease me and say, "Well, tell Becky, my wife." She goes, "Tell her thanks for bringing that in." I said, "Well, she let me use her kitchen, but I do the cooking." And I got to the point where I even wrote a cookbook before the internet was big, where you can get everything on it.
Yeah.
And so I enjoyed that. So the home ec teacher said, "Hey, boys are now taking home ec." At that point, I go, "Would you mind being a role model in the classroom and teach home ec, basic home ec, like basic sewing and cooking?"
Yeah, just basic survival life.
Yeah.
They call it Life 101
I told
now.
us like you'd be able to babysit your little brother and sister and take care of the situation. So I did. I really enjoyed it for a couple of years before I retired.
That was a good idea on behalf of that
that's
home
great.
ec teacher.
Yeah. Another experience.
Well, you already answered the first job kind of story. I mean, there have been a lot of changes in the valley in your lifetime.
Oh, it's just amazing. And the growth, I was just talking to a group the other day. They talk about, how you manage things, and you can't stop growth. It's going to happen. And my comeback is always, and sincerely, it's how you manage it. And the neighborhoods still have their identity. If you haven't lived there, it's not as easy to see as I would grow up there as a youngster. But you can maintain the integrity of a neighborhood and still have growth. And that's why I want to be involved in the city council, be part of those decision-making processes for that. I also went on to be chair and vice chair of the County Library District Board of Trustees for 10 years. So I was able to work with people throughout all of Spokane County, where we basically represent 500,000 people in population. And I enjoyed the interactions. We have different libraries in different settings, as small of an area as Fairfield to as large as Spokane Valley, and on the north side, and Medical Lake and Cheney. So I enjoyed having discussions and working on issues with people from all sorts of communities at all various levels.
Well, one of the other things I ask people about is outside activities that are kind of like outside formal education, but other passions besides work.
I love to hike. I love to fish. I just was fishing in the Spokane River with my son the other day before he left town to go to work. And a lot of people don't realize that. We grew up fishing and swimming in the river. And it's a very beautiful area. And you can go down and catch a nice big red band trout a few minutes from your home.
Yeah.
We hook and release, of course, which you're supposed to do anyway.
Which you're supposed to do,
so,
yeah.
So, and one other experience, I don't mind if I'll sneak this in here, was in high school. A very experience that really made an impact on my life was coaching Special Olympics. One of my older brothers was a full-time employee at Lakeland Village, and he took care of the Boy Scout, 4-H part, and Special Olympics. So that really had an impact. Probably made the difference in why I just chose to go into education.
What did you coach with the kids?
I coached high jump and sprinters and long distance runners.
Yeah, that's a really good program.
Yeah,
we support that for my brother-in-law.
Okay, good.
Who's been a Special Olympics competitor.
And then when I taught, there was it was interesting that the vice principal that taught me, his son had Down syndrome, and he saw that on my application that I had done so. So they had me teach a special section of, it was called Resource Room, for slower developmental leaders. But I also taught U.S. history at their level, which had helped them be able to obtain their high school diploma.
Oh, cool! What a great background.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you've with all that experience, one of the things you mentioned before we started this chat was that you'd written a book.
Yes.
And that was interesting. Why don't you tell everybody a
Oh,
little bit
sure.
about
It's
that?
the title of the book is Death Ride: A Little Boy's Night of Terror, and it's a true story of one of my former students' father-in-law. He knew I was doing research. I had done research for the history of the Spokane Police Department before that. So I'd go down the library and go to the Northwest room and use the microfilm and check on things. And so I'd like that research. And then he said, you ought to meet my father-in-law. So we ended up meeting him. And this is another great part of the story. I grew up 4 houses around the corner from him when I lived in North Spokane.
Ah,
And I went to the door and his wife goes, "Yo, you're one of the Hattenburg boys who used to trick or treat here." So it tells you how small Spokane can really
Yes,
be,
it can be,
in
yeah.
good ways too. And that was an experience that my wife and I shared that was just amazing. We met people throughout the country. The crime was committed in eastern Montana, but there was connections to a murder.
because his
in upstate
father-in-law
New-
was the little boy who survived.
Right, and so that was neat that we had him to talk to and go through things with. We have files and files of research documents. And the history teacher, me, I was able to get the history of
Yeah.
the time period. It happened during the Depression.
Yeah.
And so we were able to hopefully educate people through there what he went through. And he would talk about going down and getting vegetables and cheese, and when the government was, subsidizing when the farmers were having problems. So all sorts of things. Went back to upstate New York, where the killer had actually been incarcerated and escaped. It took about an 8-10 year journey out to the west, back to Montana. All the things we found in research led to he was probably a serial killer. They just didn't label him as a serial killer then. Because at the hanging, it's interesting that a police officer from San Bernardino, California, which was a 3,700-mile round trip by train in the dead of winter, requested an invitation to the hanging. So
Wow.
obviously he was closing a cold case file. There was also 2 officers from Wyoming where the killer had gone by a different name and worked in the oil fields who requested invitations.
I can see how that fascinated the history teacher.
Yeah, and the invitations was normal for even Spokane County. The sheriff's weather role was if there was an execution of some kind, they would give out invitations to elected officials, well-known people, respected people in the community, not for to make a show out of it by any means, but to have that witness that everything was carried out properly. So sometimes that was misconstrued over the years, the way it was presented.
Yeah, it was,
it's just-
but it was a matter of witnessing on behalf
Yeah,
of the
basically
community.
it would be like
Yeah.
having a jury of your peers saying, okay, it was carried out correctly. I mean, it's a somber enough situation no matter what, who's involved,
Right.
but that's just part of it, and that was done nationwide. So I say invitations, people go, wow, they did that.
Well,
but,
yeah. It's,
but legally they had to
Yeah.
carry out the court order.
Well, that's just, it's a fascinating story. So now I might have to go see if I can find your book sometime. But, so back onto the present, and so all that history and all that context that you bring to Spokane Valley, what made you decide that now it's your turn to step up and be one of those elected officials?
Well, one of the reasons is I'm excited about working with people in the community, and my philosophy is if you work on an issue and sit down and have conversation and dialogue with people, it'll remain an issue instead of a problem. You can't solve everything, but I really believe if you sit down with people and look at all the facts and figures and talk to each other, you can have the dialogue that'll come to some solution. And I found that most of the time that does happen, being my experience in the library board and the school district. And I've also dealt with multi-million-dollar budgets for over 30 years between the 2 districts. And I was at a budget meeting yesterday at the city of Spokane Valley, and one of the gals, executive director in the office, was kidding me. She goes, "I bet that was exciting." I go, "Well, actually it was. I like that." So I could say, hey, that's where it's going and that's why. And it was a very positive experience. The budget is actually very good in the valley. I'd like to see it remain that way. We don't have any serious problems. And we're going to have to, of course, plan just like you do in any city budget for future items and things.
Okay. Well, let me give you this last bit of time here. We're having such a good conversation,
Yes.
but it's your 1 minute to give your
Okay.
elevator speech. Why vote for Tim Hattenburg for Spokane Valley City Council?
Well, I've lived in the valley my entire life. I've seen the growth. I've seen the changes. I know what the families in the valley value and what they want to see happen. We're going to have we have many younger families and job opportunities for people to stay and remain in the Spokane area. And I think if we can continue to provide the services that provide a quality of life, we can do so. And that's one of my main goals. I want to be part of that change and part of that growth. As I said before, we are going to grow. It's how we're going to grow. And I'd like to look at it as a positive attitude. Sure, there'll be challenges, but that's like true of anything in everyday life. And I enjoy the fact immensely that it's a nonpartisan position. as it should be, just like with the library. I was on the library board to represent the people and the constituents of the library district of all of Spokane County. And that was the main reason I was on the board. Same with the city of Spokane Valley, is to represent and manage the city for the betterment of the citizens of the Spokane Valley.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in, Tim.
Well, thank you
It was
very
a pleasure
much.
meeting you.
You too. I enjoyed it.